Again, thank you all for joining us as a few of you have continued to join to lessons learned from TIA with our partners at Lubbock. We're very excited for this. And we're super excited to have Lane and Anna join us today. So I'll just wanted to start off by sharing a little bit of introduction. So I'm Gabby. I'm an account executive here at KickUp. I am a former 5th grade math and science bilingual teacher in Dallas, and super excited to be in a room filled with other Texas educators. And I wanted to kick it off to Lindsay to go ahead and introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lindsay. I'm a client success manager with KickUp. I really apologize. I have some noisy coworkers over here, aka my dog, so hopefully they will pipe down during this. But I'm actually privileged enough to work in partnership with Anna and Lane at Lubbock in everything to do with KickUp and just hopefully being a good support system and thought partner for them in everything that we're going to talk through today. So I'm really excited to be here. Hope I can answer any questions that you have.
Anna, if you want to go ahead.
Sorry, my mouse wasn't cooperating. I'm Anna Jackson. I'm the Executive Director of Leadership and Professional Development. And we have been in the process of doing TIA. We've got our cohort A set, cohort A and C, and we're actually in the process of writing cohort D right now. So that has been a great undertaking, and we're excited to get to talk to you about that today. We have also been really excited about getting to work with KickUp, and Lindsay has been a super partner as she's helped us develop that. And just keep in mind what the tools need to look like in order to really support the work of the teacher incentive allotment. So I am really excited to get to visit with you guys today and see some connections. It's good to see some faces that I know.
My name is Lane Sobrad. I'm the development coordinator for Lubbock ISD. So amongst other things, including external funding and teacher incentive allotment things, I also work with grant programs like the School Action Fund grant on helping our struggling schools become not struggling schools. And we're going to get to that goal, I think, in a little bit. Teacher incentive allotment is one of those recruiting tools we're hoping to get teachers involved with to put in those high need areas. For teacher incentive allotment specifically, I work to help the Annas and our other cabinet members of the world organize their thoughts for our TIA application. We look at the data management part of this and making sure our system is going to pass all the validation checks that TEA runs.
Awesome. I also wanted to just note that our colleague Brittany is managing the chat room, so feel free to share any comments or introductions in there as well if you wanted to throughout the presentation. Again, thank you again for everyone that has taken their time to join us. I know it's been a busy year, and especially in Texas, we know it's been extra busy this 2021. So for those of you that are joining, just wanted to go off of share a little bit of what we're hoping to go over today. So the beginning, we're going to talk about planning and using observation data, and we're going to talk with Anna and Lindsay and Lane about how they're doing this, specifically aligned to TIA, especially with calibration. We know that's such an important piece, and then also their professional learning and support that they are using and how they are assisting with this once they have all this data gathered. And then we're going to talk a lot about building investment, because we know that it's super important that communication is had to be able to build the investment for all of the administrators, all of the teachers that are going to be participating in TIA throughout the district. And then of course, we'll always make sure that we have time for Q&A and open discussion at the end, where we would love to hear your voices and kind of any questions or thoughts that y'all are having at your districts. I wanted to start off by just sharing a little bit more about KickUp. If you are not familiar with KickUp, I just wanted to touch a little bit about why we're hosting this conversation today. So like I mentioned, we are a team of former educators like myself, and we're really passionate about professional learning because we've experienced it firsthand. As a company, we believe that teachers are the most critical lever for ensuring that all students have the chance to learn. And for that to happen, we have to invest in the growth of our educators. One of the core pieces of research behind our work is Joelle and Killian's black box versus glass box evaluation. Essentially, what she says is that oftentimes districts participating in this black box evaluation, teachers participate in professional learning, but then we just kind of cross our fingers and hope for the best at the end of the year. And in turn, what she says is that we should have this glass box evaluation where teachers are participating in their professional learning, but we're able to check up throughout the year and see how it's going to ensure that our professional learning is actually growing and making an impact in the classroom. So ultimately, we know the outcomes that we're hoping for. And we at KickUp, we help districts to use this data, to collect this data in that glass box, as we were just talking about, to capture and power the instructional progress happening in between. Most recently, we launched our Appraisals Module, and that is designed fundamentally to recenter appraisals and evaluations on growing educators, and not just being this compliance check-based part of the year that we often hear that districts are doing. So while it's easy to track the completion of the process and make sure that we're filing and getting the data and reports for TEA, we've also really designed this system primarily to surface the data we need to support our educators. It's a vision that we share with our partner, Anna and Lubbock. And you're going to hear today some of how Lubbock has intentionally leveraged their data to both satisfy the nitty-gritty of TIA, which we all know is a big part and a big thought throughout this year, but also to improve their teachers' and educators' outcomes. I wanted to go ahead and hand it over to Anna to continue to introduce Lubbock.
All right, so we are really interested, as I know you all are, in making sure that as Gabby was saying, we know teachers are the most critical lever that we have. So we are super interested in both recruiting and retaining those amazing teachers. So that's where TIA really came in for us, is thinking about how do we offer something that makes people want to come to Lubbock ISD, and how do we write an application that really enhances the TIA work for them, and then how do we use that also as a retention tool. Our school board has set a goal for us that 80% of our students will be in an A-B school by 2024. So we are really working hard to make sure that we are improving all of our school campuses to where when we look at the data, we can see that this is a really successful learning environment for our students. So that really works to drive every decision we make in our district. Is it going to help us accomplish that goal of 80% of our students being in A-B schools? And so as we think about that, we know that we have to have great systems in place to recognize and to reward our teachers who are doing great things. And we have to be able to replicate the things that they're doing in the classroom to help other teachers learn and grow. And so we're really excited that this work allows us to do that. It helps us to really identify where our successful instruction is taking place, and use those people to empower other teachers to grow as well. And we have been excited about KickUp as a part of that. And I'm going to talk some more about that throughout our time together on how we're able to use that to really be a tool that helps others grow and to be able to evolve. So for us, TIA is really about improving teaching and learning for every single student every day. And we do that when we really are very thoughtful about how we assess performance and provide feedback to people. So when we're looking at our TIA structure and we're looking at our rollout, one of the things that I would tell you just a little bit historically about Lubbock ISD is that we have had an awards or an incentive program in place for quite some time. We were already recognizing teacher using value-added data to assess their growth and be able to provide some rewards for them for that growth. We were able to reward teachers. We were able to reward supporting staff. We were able to reward campuses that were growing as well. So that was one thing that was to our advantage, is that we had already done some work at identifying measures of success and working to support people in that. We already had relationships to help us gather that data, analyze that data, to really measure how we were growing students. But we were finding that some of our other data was a little bit lacking. And so that's where we had to expand our circles out a little bit as we made the shift from our E3 model to the TIA model that's developed by the state. As you know, money is always an issue in public schools. So the fact that there was a state-based incentive system allowed us to shift some of the focus of our local funds to be sure that we were putting them towards students and student growth and be able to capitalize on some of those state provided funds. So we began to make a shift on how we were going to recognize and reward our teachers. So we wrote cohort A and C as our first application. When we were looking at cohort A, we were looking at our STAR tested subjects for grades 3 through 11. And then we had other characteristics that we looked at as well, which included achievement, growth, our attendance rates, our professional development, and then, of course, our T-test or our appraisal systems. We couldn't do cohort B because COVID, everything is because of COVID. So we don't have a cohort B group, but we are this year in the process of adding on cohort D, which we are deep in throes of right now, looking at how do we help our teachers who are in non-STAR tested areas or fine arts or CTE or special ed be able to qualify for teacher incentive allotment as well. So right now we're in the process of looking at what it looks like for those. STAR and iStation with our cohort C, that's pretty cut and dry. You know, we don't have to do a whole lot of analysis to determine if they're meeting the marks or not. But when you're thinking about all those outlier groups, that's certainly more of a challenge. So that pulls us into deep conversations about what is the best way to measure if our students are achieving and growing at the rates that are needed. So we do not have final measures set up for what percentage and what weight the different criteria are going to be. We're not even 100% sure what the criteria will be. We know that growth and achievement is a huge part of that, and we know that the appraisal is a part of that, and we're actually required to address those pieces. But we're in the process right now of identifying what the other weights and measures need to be in order to have a really equitable system. I would say for us, that's one of the big conversations we're also having is how do you have an equitable system? You know, how does the teacher who has the rigor of STAR, who's next door to the fine arts person who maybe doesn't have that same level of rigorous assessment, how do we make sure that we have an equitable system and that we are creating a system that is easily understandable by staff and is really keeping a sharp focus on having a valid measure by which we're giving teachers feedback as part of this incentive allotment. So all that to say, we really do believe that recognizing teachers for what they do is a great way to recruit them and retain them. We also think it's a great, I would add another R to that, and that would be the replicate, that it's a great way for us to replicate good practice for other teachers and keep and help them grow. And then the final thing that I would kind of say on that is that when we are thinking about our teachers and we're thinking about helping them to be effective instructors, we want them to stay in the classroom. We don't want them to have to move outside of the classroom to financially be able to provide for their families. So that is a huge benefit of the teacher incentive allotment, is to keep great instructors in the classrooms. We actually had some of our teachers in cohort A and C that had just moved into instructional coach roles or assistant principal roles, and then realized, whoa, I can make as much money being in my classroom. I think I might want to go back to my classroom. And we actually kind of viewed that as a success because, as you all know, we're facing shortages and challenges every day with recruiting educators and people wanting to be in the profession. I think this last year and a half has made that even more so of a concern for us. So the fact that we can use money to recruit them, retain them, keep them in the classroom is a huge, huge benefit to us.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for going into that level of detail, Anna. We really appreciate that and love hearing your vision and how you're accomplishing it. As Gabby said in the beginning, please do feel free to, engage in the chat. Like anything that you hear that resonates with you, you can jump in there with, get that conversation started there. But we're going to zoom in a little bit here to some of the learnings that we've had from data. As Anna said, data is kind of the word of the day here. TIA requires collecting, coordinating lots of data, and we know that there's many ways to collect data, but we really want to think about how you design your data collection to make it useful, intentional, credible, and yeah, not just something you're doing, like we've said, to check boxes, but rather to put that data to work for you. So I want to start the conversation off by just kind of posing a question to you. So we know that in designing data collection, observations are a big piece of that. What's actually happening on the ground in the classroom and what's being implemented. So Anna, how did you design that nitty-gritty data collection in order to meet the TIA requirements, but also be useful to your team?
So I'm really excited to kind of talk about this one. So when we were looking, of course, like you all, we had a system in place that we were using to track our appraisals. But as you know, when we first rolled T-tests out in the state, it was never designed to be about numbers. It was not designed to be quantifiable data. We were supposed to be using it for feedback and for growth. But then in order to qualify for TIA, we had to be able to put a number to it and a measure to it. So one of the first roadblocks we ran into as part of our initial application for TIA was pulling together our data. And it highlighted some holes that we had in our systems and some lacking data that we had. We had to do a lot of taking and converting and making it meet the needs that we had for uploading our first data source to TEA. So that made us really think critically about how are we going to start to collect this data in a way that still is true to improving the quality of instruction, but is also able to transition into meeting the quantifiable needs. So that was one of the reasons, honestly, that we switched over to KickUp as our appraisal tool, because we had been using it for some other work that we were doing. We were using it with our coaching logs in the district, and we were using it for some of our professional learning feedback. And the heat maps that we were able to produce, we had fallen in love with. And so my mind immediately began to jump to how beneficial those same heat maps and those views could be to our administrators as we're really thinking about helping the growth side of it. But then to be able to take that data and plug it into our data upload to meet the TIA requirement was really helpful as well. And I actually had a story happen today that I want to share with you kind of on that note, because I think it really drives home the benefit of this tool for growth. I had a principal that had a PLC this morning, and they're working on student and teacher engagement, and they were having some conversations, and her teachers really didn't land in the place that she wanted in terms of what's good, effective teacher engagement looks like, what monitoring and adjusting looks like. And so she was really trying to think through, how do I coach them to recognize that you cannot meet the monitor and adjust and the differentiation needs of T-tests if you're at your desk. And so how do I have those coaching conversations with them? So we went in and we pulled up her data, and we looked at all of the data from their observations and walkthroughs. And we're able to note that in the data that they've been collecting so far this year, those were two areas that were actually lower for their building than the other dimensions. And so there's now data that she can take back to that same PLC and say, based on what we're collecting, this is an area that we're not growing in. And if we don't grow in this area, will our students grow and help us meet that 80% of students in AB schools? And so it's just a really powerful tool to help us dig in and look, as you're seeing there on the screens, just at a glance, where we're falling with the dimensions to help us grow. But then you'll also see the numerical value there that's helpful as we think about how do we upload that data from domains 2 and 3 for our TIA application. I noticed a thing popping up. Lane, I was reading what you wrote. Did you want to chime in on that one?
Sure. So the first question was, how did we, I got to scroll up a little bit. Sorry, folks. How are we collecting observation data in order to meet the TIA requirements and make it useful for your team? So what KickUp is going to help us with is building out a report that meets the specifications in that data file too. For those of you who are already in TIA, you know all of those columns in data file too. They're going to help us meet the specifications of that. And in addition, there's already a dashboard on KickUp that we're utilizing that I think are going to be on the next couple of slides, where we have heat maps that are very approachable and accessible according to the appropriate role you have in your district. Teacher, campus leader, just somebody like Anna who's looking at multiple campuses, et cetera. And so both of those roles make working with TIA and this system way easier than our previous system, where in our first TIA data submission, Anna was manually converting t-tests into a quantifiable number, which is not a good use of her time.
Or my brain. I didn't trust my brain.
Yeah. And so as I kind of indicated to Maribel's question here, we transitioned from Eduphoria to KickUp for our teacher observation, both data collection and reporting out. Because Eduphoria could not do some of the things that we needed them to do in their reporting tools. And we wanted to get rid of things like principals manually entering grade and subject for teachers they're appraising. Because one of the validation checks that TEA wants us to run for our TIA frameworks is comparing designations across assignments, grade levels, and campuses. And so having that functionality in KickUp is going to make that process way easier if you're trying to run those self audits before you submit to TEA.
Yeah, thanks so much for jumping in there with that. I would actually love to just go back a few slides, if you don't mind, to slide 13, I think it is, the one where there's that beautiful moving picture. Just to orient you a little bit to what you're seeing here. So this speaks a little bit to what Anna was describing when she's talking about being able to take a look at domains 2 and 3 overall, drilling into one individual. So you see this click on James Harvey, and then being able to drill in specifically to how this fake user, don't worry, we're not putting anybody's real information out there, is doing in t-test domain 2. So maybe someone could deploy supports to James in that way. So you can see in aggregate, how's everyone doing in 2 and 3, and then drill in to that individual level to be able to, just see a little bit more specifically what's happening on the ground. So thanks for going back for me. So I know that you all touched on this a little bit in what we already talked about, but yeah, we wanted to definitely explicitly talk about calibration, because we know that that's very critical to TEA and the TIA specifically. Would you care to elaborate a little bit about how your team goes about calibration? And this one's for, either of you, Lane or Anna.
I think this is one of the pieces that we are very much a work in progress on. I feel like when we first rolled out t-test that we did a pretty good job of doing some calibration because it was a new tool and it was really, really necessary. But like anything, the more confidence you get, sometimes the less calibration you do. And so one of the things that I do value about this work is that it is drawing us back to some of those grassroots to make sure, are we well calibrated within buildings? Are we well calibrated across buildings? Are we well calibrated within different subjects and grades and contents? And again, going back to that equity issue, I think that that is a really huge thing. is making sure that every teacher is getting a well-calibrated appraisal and feedback on their walkthroughs and their observations. And so I think that this is brought us back around to having good practices that we had kind of drifted away from a little bit. So we are very conscientiously plugging into our leadership team meetings time to do some calibration, to watch some videos, to score, to look for outliers on those, and to have some feedback conversations about it as well. When we were switching to, when we decided to make the switch from Eduphoria to Kickup, I was a little nervous because I don't know about y'all, but I feel like we've got a lot going on in our district this year. Anybody else? You know, it's like, oh, what a terrible time to make a huge change. So I pulled in some of my principals first, and I just showed them the tool. And if they had said, Anna, what are you thinking? We can't do this, we would have held steady. But they saw the data and they were willing to roll with it because the data was rich. So we took that step out and we made the shift over to being able to transition. Having said that, it was still important that we managed the change, right? Because if there's one thing about right now, change is it. So we haven't jumped in and dug as deep into all of the various pieces that are available. First, we just needed to know, how do you claim your teachers? How do you open up the tool? How do you complete the tool, which is very user-friendly and very easy, very intuitive. But our next step is going through and really laying on, how do you as a building administrator dig into the data, like the data that you're seeing there on the screen, break it down across your various contents, break it down across the different appraisers in your building, and be able to really look and see, are we landing in a well-calibrated place? And then how do we take this appraisal data and compare it to our student growth data? And if we're a D school, should all of our teachers be marked as highly effective and proficient or above? You know, so how do I have those conversations with my leadership team to make sure that we're landing in the right place to help teachers grow for the benefit of student growth? So I think being able to use the tool to have conversations both at the district and at the campus level to make sure that we are well calibrated in how we're collecting data, how we're analyzing data, and how we're providing feedback around that data is really, really important. I think the next slide shows you a slightly different screen where you can look at it by role and look and see how our elementary teachers versus our high school teachers versus our middle school teachers are doing. This screenshot is actually really important. Because I don't know about y'all, but when we look at our middle school data, they struggle. And so it's really helpful to us to look and see what areas are our middle school teachers struggling the most. How do we support them so that transition group of kids doesn't lose as much ground? How do we make sure that we're equipping those teachers with the skills that they need? We have executive principals in our district who supervise campus principals. And so they are able to go and have coaching conversations around the data that they're able to pull here too. So I think that we really are working to expand the ripples on this. So we've gotten good with using the tool. Now we're getting better with using the data. And that's really our goal for the next 6 months, is to look at how do we really get great at analyzing the data so that when we kick off this upcoming year, we are in a good spot for that.
So, and I'll tack on to that too, more specific to TIA. Those of you who are applying for cohort D, you know, on the application in the teacher observation tab, it asks specific questions about how you identify skew at the campus and the district level. And what data do you use to identify skew across assignments and across campuses? And so our answer is this. This is how we identify that skew. And so if that's a concern of your district on that cohort D application, having something like this is useful. Not just in principle, right? Anna laid out all of the very practical reasons why these sorts of views are useful. Specific to TIA, it gives you some really specific answers to some of those application questions.
Yeah, thanks for elaborating. If you want to go back one slide, I will just say, just again, to orient you to what you're looking at. If you see, this is grouped by role. The previous was grouped by content. But as Lane and Anna are mentioning, there's almost unlimited possibilities for the ways that you could group your data, including by campus, which we know is important to TIA, or you could also group your data by evaluator. And that could help you make sure that, you know, within one campus, are my evaluators on the same page when they are looking at even the same classroom, for example. So there's a lot of ways to drill in there. And the numbers, those percentages that you're seeing, are the percentage of people observed, teachers observed, who fell into those top 2 rubric categories for T-tests. So just orienting you a little bit to what's on your screen. Thank you so much for going into that level of detail. I'm going to pass it over to Gabby to keep the conversation going.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again. And I wanted to just circle back to, Anna, you said the equity and the equality of how you are evaluating your teachers. I want to say, as a former STAR tested subject teacher, I think that's very important and something I often thought about as a teacher. So I really love that Lubbock is thinking about that. I guess just wanted to, so we know that with a teacher evaluation, right, there's a lot of different aspects of it. And one of those is PD and the what do we do with the data that we're gathering. So can you share a bit about how you plan to or how you already are supports in the district?
Absolutely. And I see some of my professional development friends on the screen here. So this is going to be singing your song on some of this work. As you know, y'all are probably already so far into 21, 22 that you forget what year you're currently living in. Anybody there? You know, you're planning so far ahead that you're missing today's events because you're in the wrong year. I told somebody the other day the wrong date for Easter because I'm already thinking about the next year. It's already next year for me. So as we're thinking that way and rounding that curve for the planning, one of the things I just really love, I was doing some kind of pre-training with some of the people that will be doing some of our summer professional development. And as they are designing their professional learning, I think it's really important to connect back to what are we seeing with our appraisal data to make sure that we're including the right pieces. And one of the things that I'm noticing, and I've already mentioned a little bit, is that when I look at our data, our differentiation across the board is an area that we're really struggling. And I don't know about y'all, but right now we got a lot of need for differentiation. We've got kids who have been in school. We've got kids who have been virtual. We've got kids who supposedly on virtual, but we haven't seen them. They're fixing to come back and hit the buildings. And differentiation is going to be a huge need. And it's an area that's not as strong. It's not terrible, but it's not as strong as some of the other areas. So to be able to pull up a piece of data and share with my people who are planning professional learning and saying that as we are designing our PD this summer, we need to include differentiation in with that content. Instead of it being a standalone kind of thing, it needs to be woven into all of our conversations. To me, that is huge and really, really practical data that they can use to design their professional learning. I gave you the example of being able to coach the principal today. And it was super easy for me to pull up that data and be able to help her think about how that job embedded professional learning she was needing to do right then to have a good conversation, how she could address that to help her teachers expand their thinking. We all know that there's lots of different systems you can use to pull data. To me, the heat maps just make the data pop for me. And so I didn't have to say, well, let me go analyze your data and I'll get back to you in a couple of days. You know, I could pull it up right there. She could pull it up on her screen and we could have a really great coaching conversation around it. So all that to say that when we think about this data to improve our professional learning, it is exactly what should be driving our professional learning. Where are the areas that our teachers are struggling the most? And how do we make sure that we're addressing that in an ongoing and intentional manner? So KickUp has been a really good tool for us to help us think that through. In return, connecting it back to TIA, when the teachers are improving their practice, their appraisals are going to improve their ability to qualify for TIA is going to go up. Connecting that back to our students, when teaching improves and instruction improves, then we know that the learning will improve. So we really have a comprehensive way to impact the success of all the people within the organization when we're able to analyze data and make our plans accordingly.
So Anna, could you tack on one addendum to that? So Brittany had a question about how we're planning on engaging in calibration. So we have these awesome coaching meetings with kick-up data. What happens when a teacher needs to, or when an appraiser needs to calibrate because something looks funky?
Yeah, so to make sure that I understand the question there, when we're thinking about, there's so many different teams, so there's the cabinet team, and what are we doing to look at the data from a really high level? There's our curriculum instruction professional learning teams that are more rubber meets the road. There are the principals as a learning team on their campuses, and you really have to calibrate at each of those levels. From my higher view, I have to be looking to make sure that across the whole, that building to building, we are well calibrated and we're having conversations. And one of the things Lane referred back to if you're looking at the cohort D application is how are you going to drill down to the root cause? So you have this area that's lower. Why? What is the root cause? So I think that's the other part that we, Lane and I were actually wrestling through yesterday as we were working on the cohort D application, is really drilling down to the root cause of why differentiation for us is a lower area and what can we do to bring that up. And then the calibration again with the building administrators. If I'm a principal in one of our high schools and I have 5 assistant principals, it's really important that we are pulling back together and looking at our data to make sure that content to content, appraiser to appraiser, that we are having critical conversations about it, which means we have to really look at the data. If I look at the data in isolation and I know that there's a problem, but I don't ever share that data with the teams that are affected by that, then we won't see a change in practice. So I think really using the data to come together and have those root cause analysis conversations and develop action plans accordingly is really important.
Cool. Lane, would love for you to just, share a little bit about how you plan to use some of this data. I know that you have this beautiful graph. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sure. So this is a snapshot of some anonymous teachers and their respective designation scores in one of our cohorts. So our designation system, we've weighted on a 1,000-point scale. And depending upon what your score is, you get a designation or you don't. And part of the challenge, one of the big challenges we found with TAA, and I'm sure it is for your districts too, if you're already participating in it, or are currently struggling with if you're trying to apply for cohort D this year, is that our district is trying to pull data from a dozen different places to consolidate it to submit to TEA for TIA designation. So for student growth, we're going to be pulling stuff from SAS. We're going to be pulling stuff from our own district assessments for cohort D. We're going to have SLOs, and we're going to have some pre-post test assessments. That all has to be quantified in some way. And we have to have a system in place to put that into a single place so that teachers can look at it, so campus principals can look at it, so that Anna can look at it, and our superintendent and board can look at it. We also have to have t-tests for all of those people assembled in some way. And as has kind of been indicated today, Kickup's made that process much more efficient for us this year than it has been in the past. We have to pull teacher attendance data from Frontline to get incorporated into this report. And then we have to aggregate all of those things and calculate a designation score for teachers. So one of my strong suggestions for any district not currently participating in TIA is to have something that is approachable for teachers to look at. I included the raw scores here, but what our teachers are only going to see are those blue columns and then the gold column on the right. So they don't care about they don't care about any of the specific numbers. They want to know, what did I get and did I qualify to get the bucks, right? From Anna's perspective, we can use this data to do some of that drilling down in different kinds of calibration areas. So one of the most important checks that TEA tells us that we have to run is comparing teacher observation to student growth, whatever your student growth measure is, whether you're using MAP or that STAR or something else for your growth measure. And so what you can see there in the two green rows are teachers who have a very similar t-test score, but a very different student growth score. So again, this is a sampling of two, so take that with a grain of salt, right? So both teachers scored very well on their t-test observation. But if we compare that to student growth, well, one teacher, right, for our student growth, a bigger number is you grew your students more, right? So teacher B there grew their student significantly more than teacher G. But at least according to our appraisers, they scored very well. They both scored similarly on t-test. So what is the reason for the discrepancy? So do we go look at Kickup and look at that appraiser's entire list of teachers to see if there's a calibration issue? Or is one teacher at a very high achieving campus that's going to deflate potential growth scores? Or is one teacher at a very high needs campus that may artificially inflate growth score? So having data like this to look at in this way helps us, if we know we're rock solid on our teacher appraisal calibration, it allows us to more easily identify other areas of need in whatever our system is.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, Lane, that's super helpful. And I guess something I want to know is, how are you communicating that with stakeholders, being teachers, administrators, how I know you are sharing that only parts of that is shown to the teacher, but would love to know, how are you making this intentional to communicate around this process? As we know, this is especially money is a tough subject to have.
So starting with the next school year, just because things with computers and technology take a while, our plan is to roll out a TIA scorecard that teachers are going to be able to look at annually after the data capture year, whether they qualify for designation in our system or not. So for people in Anna's world, this allows you to have coaching opportunities with teachers. Oh, designation is cut point X. You were X minus 5. Well, it looks like your growth area was in t-test domains 2.1, 2, and 3. So let's really work on those, and we can get you across the finish line to qualify for designation next year. And so in a similar way, Anna will be able to have those conversations with principals too. Oh, it looks like, well, maybe not Anna. In a CNI world, it looks like your teachers really struggled on the science pre-post assessment. We didn't see very much growth there. But it looks like, according to their teacher appraisal system, that they all have really good classrooms and their students are really engaged. So what can we do to help students grow more on that pre-post assessment in 8th grade science or whatever the subject happens to be? So having that kind of access to data is going to be super essential for our TIA system going forward.
I'm really glad, kind of on that note, that we were able to start off with, our STAR test and iStation. That was really, there were some, it was already valid. We already had established that, that we had that in place while we were working on our calibration, because you have the question come up. So let's say that you have a great t-test, but your student scores are not where you would want them to be. Well, is that because the t-test is skewed? Or is that because there's an issue with the instrument, or do we really have a huge disconnect? And so by making sure that our administrators are well calibrated with their appraisals, now it helps us to be more critical as we're thinking about cohort D, which is not as well designed, or I'm not gonna say well designed, but is not as clear with the cut lines. it's going to give us a better ground to have conversations about, well, do we have instrument issues in terms of how we're measuring student growth, or do we really have student growth issues, to have those conversations. So I think Lane said some things there that are really important, that it's important teachers know that there's no magic behind this formula, that they can see it, they can calculate it. Not that I've ever done it, but some of you may have gone on to TRS and calculated your retirement to see if you can do it or not. You know, having those little calculators let you say, oh yeah, no, I better suck it up and get back to the work. Kind of the same idea with TIA is, if I can go in there, I can plug in my data and I can see where my strengths and weaknesses are, then I can make changes in my practice to be able to qualify.
Yeah. And you mentioned TRS. So wanted to just, I guess, ask, moving on to that, how did y'all decide to structure your compensation model?
So our district leaders, mainly our superintendent and our board, felt very strongly for our district that if a teacher is,
no money.
oops. Sorry, Gabby, I think I cut you off on accident.
Oh no, go ahead. I think my internet's off.
So our superintendent and our board felt very strongly that if a teacher earns a designation individually, then that individual should receive the lion's share of that compensation. So what House Bill 3 dictates is that 90% of the allotment provided to a teacher earning designation goes to teacher compensation on the campus where that teacher earned the designation at. In our system, all 90% of that money goes to the individual teacher that earned the designation. So what that in practicality looks like is that allotment row down there, where we have teachers, we have more than a couple of our designated teachers who are receiving an extra $20,000 per year or more for each of the 5 years of their designation. And so that's a really big deal. That's also part of why we want to make sure that our system is as good as it possibly can be, because when we're talking about potentially giving somebody $100,000 over 5 years, we want to make sure that we're giving it to the people that actually earn those dollars. In addition to that, we also wanted to make sure that that big boost in salary was able to be applied to teachers' TRS pensions. Those of you who are new to TIA, if you have that question, TEA has told us, talk to your TRS coach. They should say yes and tell you the steps you need to do to make sure that you can do that. That doesn't mean your district has to do that. And in the various trainings that we've been on for TIA, for those of you who are new to this, they have indicated that you can provide it as a bonus or a stipend or something else that's not strictly salaried. That's just the system that we've chosen to use. In addition to that, it was at least confusing to us as we're participating in multiple cohorts what the timelines for these things look like. And again, just if you're new to TIA, the data capture year, payouts to teachers work on a lagging time frame. So data capture this year submits data in the fall of 21. TEA is going to notify districts of new designated teachers in the spring, and then teachers don't actually get paid out until the following school year. That was very confusing to me from the get-go, and especially if you're running with multiple cohorts like we are, keeping those things in line, and probably more importantly, keeping teachers, staff, and principals let me rephrase that. Keeping everybody on the same page in terms of what those timelines look like in their various roles, because you're going to have a cohort A teacher, C teacher, D teacher who are saying, well, I got paid this at this time, and that may be different than people in different cohorts. So that communication piece was also really important for us, and having things like that annual scorecard and some of the other digital tools we're going to be rolling out this semester and over the summer are going to be super important for that communication part.
Awesome. And I know I want to give a lot of time for questions and answering. So we're coming to that 10-minute mark. Just one quick question I had for you guys was, do you utilize any ongoing performance standards within your compensation plan to ensure the designated quality is maintained? And if so?
So the absolute guiding document for this is that House Bill 3 document.
Gotcha.
House Bill 3 does not require that once designation is earned, teachers maintain whatever the qualifications for that designation status are. That doesn't mean your system can't have something like that in place. It's just that we're not legally obligated to do so. At the same time, it does allow districts the autonomy to what they call it, they say void a designation. That's not something the district can do independently. You have to request that the status is revoked by the state because that designation is attached to a teacher's teaching certification. It's not something provided locally by the district.
Gotcha. Thank you so much for that question. Dr. Straub actually asked from HISD.
And I would just add on to that too, that while we're not required, we do think that it's really valid to constantly be making sure that you don't say, oh, peace, I got my money, I'm going to sit back now. You know, we don't want that to happen. So as part of our appraisal system, even though they might not have, they may be able to go on a waiver, but there will still be some components that they still have to do. They still have to have their walkthrough, still have to have their goal setting, still have to have their summative pieces. And so there's never a spot where you get to totally disappear from it. We are data rich in our district, and we are constantly analyzing data from a million different lenses. And we'll continue to do that because we do have to, even if we don't have a responsibility to TEA, we have a responsibility to our students to make sure that we're making sure that teachers are still maintaining those standards that allow them to get the designation. So certainly we will put in and have put in some of our own systems just to make sure that everybody has to keep dancing.
And I think we hinted at it briefly, but regardless of whether a teacher is designated, not designated, eligible for designation or not, in our system, every teacher generates the various data points for their TIA scorecard every year anyways. Because just as Anna said, we want to be able to track all the data that we possibly can. To address Maribel's question, every campus in the state has a designated allotment to it, whether or not you have a TIA framework in place or not. And so that teacher who moved, who earned a designation somewhere else that's coming into your district, whatever campus they're at is going to generate an allotment. And it would be up to your district to decide on how to disperse those funds according to the specifications in House Bill 3.
Awesome. I want to go ahead and invite as well, while we have the last 5 minutes, to anybody who wants to ask a question, feel free to come off mute, and Anna and Lane would be happy to answer any of your questions. We could go ahead and pause the recording if that be the case as well.